Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Nature Folklore Sessions. It's 8th of August, 2021. Well, thank you for joining me here for our weekly session of exploring nature-centered folklore, connecting this within your favorite sanctuary space, and expressing your inspired visions from your sanctuary through your poetry, writing, arts, craft, performance, and problem solving. Now, this afternoon is part 3 of 4 parts of covering the myths and legends of Lunasa, first harvest, Lammas. And this week and next week, I'm covering Crom Cruach and Crom Dubh. And this will complete this year's Lunasa series. And I'm afraid last year I tried to throw it all together into the first harvest edition. And when I was looking into Crom, goodness, I really rushed through it last year and realized it needed 2 weeks. And what's happened this week, I've been tied with a few other things. So I haven't quite prepared it as much as I would have liked to. It's not going to be as graphical as I usually do, but I am sure you're going to be fascinated by the information because the Croms are not really spoken about so much. Lugh, yes, Tailtiu, yes, but not the Croms. So any of the photos that I don't manage to get up this time, and it is going to be me solo, we do have a couple of poems from B, which is great. We've got her as well, because she's actually got a Crom poem. But anything I miss out in the graphics, we'll have a bit of a reprise next week on the part 2 of this. So I hope you come back then, because actually towards the end of this, there is a bit of an edge of the couch kind of finale that I'll hope back for the next week. Anyway, I'm going to get on the show, and as usual, to remind you that these Nature Folklore sessions and Garrett Labyrinth Gardens here, they're brought to you thanks to you kind subscribers, and always in gratitude every week when we're on the air and you've helped to make this possible. So thank you very much for your continued support. So let's see, kick off with who's joined us already early just now. And there we go. And we've actually got a new template. StreamYard's given us a new template. So that's something else I got to get used to today. But it looks a lot better. There's Willie Collins. Hello there from Cork. Our regular Alan is there from Kildare. And Donna Johnson, his good morning. And Sherry, who's been busy, is back with us. Lovely to see you, Sherry. Good morning to you. And Davina's managed to make it along as well from Virginia. So thank you very much. And I think I see Chandler somewhere there. Yeah, good morning from Tennessee, Chandler. So I'll say good morning to everybody else as they tend to join in. And now I was going to actually start off by explaining about the Dinchenkas. Can't even pronounce this today. Dinkenkas. Which is a form of poetry the Scribes came up with about the 11th century. It's featured quite strongly in the Book of Leinster and the Book of Invasions. And I was going to cover that today, but that's one of the things that's been put on the side. I'll come back with that next week. But a lot of the stories that people tell these days about Lugh and Tailtiu and about Lunasa generally, they come from these poems. I forget how many there are. I'll talk about that next week. But according to this Irish Dinsenkus, which really means it's the law of place. It's how place names get their names. And a lot of these characters and the stories either come out of the place names or the place names come out of the stories and mythology. They're very intertwined. And anyway, in the Book of Leinster, there is quite a bit about Crom Dubh. Book of Invasions and the Book of Leinster has the whole Lugh thing. But the Croms, the Book of Leinster is the place to go. But if you try and read it yourself, it's very confusing. And no wonder there's different translations out of this. But it talks about the Crom Cruach cult, talks about it as a cult. And that's an interesting word in itself. Cult, we think in terms of religious cults, spiritual cults. But cult, in a way, is also short for culture. And culture is a group of people in ancient times. They will come together. They didn't have television, of course. They didn't have internet. They didn't have books. So their culture, which is how people live together and share together, is very much what we might call a cult today. So I think the thing gets confused. But with Crom Dubh, with Crom Cruach especially, he's a cult image of a gold figure that's surrounded by 12 stone figures. Now, I'm going to try and get some pictures up for this, because I haven't got my pictures organized as if I have them organized anyway. But I've got some random photos, and as the StreamYards get a different way of me bringing them up. So here we go. There's an image there of the... there he is. That's one of the figures. I'm going to come up with something a bit better than that very soon. But anyway, that's said to be a gold figure, and in some stories, a gold and silver. And I'm going to bring that up. And that doesn't look very gold, does it? It looks more silver and a little bit of gold. And then you get those 12 little stone figures. Some stories say they're statues, that they're bronze statues, or they're covered in bronze. So I'm going to talk a bit more in depth about that very shortly, and give you a bit of insight on that. And they all stood on this area called Magh Slécht, which is the plain of prostration. And this is in County Cavan. This is a bit of a map. I don't know if you can make sense of it here. If anybody's familiar with Ballyconnell, I have taken some tour groups there. It's a fascinating place, but that's roughly a ring of the area. If you look on maps later, west of Ballyconnell there, and that is the Magh Slécht area. And there's quite a bit talked about it, as well as in the Book of Leinster. It's in the tripartite life of St. Patrick, and there's a deity called Crom Cruach that's in that St. Patrick book. And with Crom Cruach, his cult image consisted of a central figure covered with gold and silver, and the 12 bronze figures, just like I showed you there. And in Jocelyn's 12th century Life and Acts of St. Patrick, you've got that story as well, similar story as well. So those are things to look up if you remember that. And also there's a god called Crom Cruach, and he's interpreted as the head of all gods. So there's Crom Cruach. So I might have some of those spellings up very shortly. So what this is an indication of some of the things I'm going to be talking about today and also next Sunday. And I will aim to connect it all to what you might know and what's familiar with Lunasa this harvest time. So far I've covered some of the folklore of Bilberry Sunday, Garland Sunday, along with the wooing, the romancing, and the mating that happens on that last Sunday of July, and how that's all associated. Last Sunday I covered the first harvest, the first loaves from barley, later spelt, and the pilgrimage climbing of hills and mountains, originally to bury the loaves, and I covered that as well. But pilgrimage is now a kind of penance, as we know, up Croagh Patrick, etc. And I also covered Lammas and the Lunasa fairs, which are great fun, and the festivals, which is fabulous during this transition, because it's the breakup of summer. July, it's hungry July, things are growing, and you're just desperate to harvest. And all of a sudden, end of July, they've got all this ceremony and celebration of cutting of harvest. And then all the trading's done, the beginning of August, debts are paid, everybody's got plenty to eat, but we're going into the darkness of fall, of autumn. So as I say, through this Sunday and next Sunday, I'm going to unravel as much as I can about the ancient Crom mythology, folklore, and even its cult itself. And it's certainly much more rooted to folklore than perhaps most of the other things I presented on these nature folklore sessions. And I feel their mythology inspires a much deeper guiding connection too, about how nature is flowing at this time of year. I normally talk, obviously, water and trees, but this is about farming that I don't usually get to. But I think it's so important this time because this is what's feeding us. We got a culture of farming, and we work and we live through this. Otherwise, we don't eat. So this is what makes the Lammas, Lunasa, and the Crom time very important. Now, the Crom stories, Crom Cruach, is lots of fragments. It's very confusing when you take from the Book of Leinster. So I'm going to focus on two locations. And one, I did point out, there's Magh Slécht, and that's west of Ballyconnell. I'm going to try and bring another map up for you here. And this time I think I've ringed Ballyconnell. There we are. There's Ballyconnell there. And see that ring at the bottom? That's going to be a very important area that we're going to talk about. It's very much, though I gave you the Magh Slécht here, the bigger area, if you can see Ballyconnell there to your right there, and that's the top dot there. That bottom dot there, I'm going to be talking quite a bit. There's a lot of action and a lot of debris, and there's a lot of fragments of the story come together. It's Killycruggan area there, a fascinating place, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. And I'm also going to be talking about it down in Limerick, the Grange, and some of you watching here have been there one way or the other. Big Grange circles, there's a big one. And that was a very important place this time of year. It was a threshing area. And some of you have been there, and you might see that big stone at the back there. And there's next to that is a little tiny stone with coins on, and it looks like loads of flatbreads. What's that, Indian naan breads piled on one another. And I think that's what it symbolizes. I'm going to talk about that more next week. I probably won't have time for that one this time. And I'm going to tell you about that big stone next week as well as what was on it. But anyway, there's Grange. I might get to some of that today. Most of it I think I'll cover next week. And before that, I'd like to revise why these Sunday sessions are actually called Nature Folklore. Now, when ancient stories are told, by far the most popular are the deeds of heroes, and especially if those heroes are gods and goddesses, aren't they? And maybe there's much more excitement when there's a humble human, think of Lugh and Bala, and the humble human overcomes giants like Bala and serpents and dragons and giants. And sometimes these humble peasant people, they overcome leaders that are warring against them and taking them from them. And you've got these heroes up against armies, and where everybody, they're wearing horn hats, long beards, and of course tattooed undercarriages. You might have seen that with the Picts. So, to me, it's as if all of these famous and popular stories of ancient warriors and giants and so forth, they're like the original DC and Marvel comics as composed by the ancient medieval scribes. And by the traditional Shanachie, suddenly the Shanachie becomes the traditional I'll shock ye. And with Nature Folklore, I try and avoid most of that. And I try to encourage more return to contemplation, connection, and conversation about season changes. And also the weather accompanies this. Of course, on Facebook, I put the weather report up every week for this area anyway, every day. So with Nature Folklore, I talk about how things connect to the weather and temperatures and the changing balances, the seasons, the changes from light to darkness, and all how we live through that rather than have a sword and cut people's heads off. I don't really cover that too much. So I'm asked, why do I bother with such folklore? And I think a similar question might be asked, why bother with the storybooks? Why bother with TV dramas? Why computer games? Why media? Why the arts at all? Why do we bother with all of those? Well, I think us humans seem to seek stimulation to become motivated, become imaginative and visionary. And it's through our visions that I truly believe that's how we get things done today. And as to me, is what Nature Folklore does for me. It's great for being an oracle, I suppose, for giving visions and stirring the imagination of what can be done today with respect, with gratitude. Now, obviously, I can't speak for you over this, but I don't know. I just can't get anything done if I just stick to reading bland step by step instructions from a book. I thrive on the stimulation of the visions and connections. So that's why I choose Nature Folklore. As you know, tree and water folklore is my main passion, but this is harvest time and farming, and this is what we're focusing on for this week and next week anyway. So, let's see, so we're going to go. I'm going to get myself back to the Crom Cruach and Crom Dubh now. I'm going away. And first of all, before we do this, there's a few people who've checked in and missed my ramble there. And we got Seven Serpents through the YouTube. That's very topical. Good morning to you, Seven Serpents. Promise we won't banish you. Try not to banish you. Sharon Maynichol, good morning to you. And we got Terry Slack Hardwick. Glad to meet you here as well. Fantastic. And Cathal oh, we haven't had you for a while. Good afternoon, Cathal. Great. We are meeting the snake god today, are we? That might be next week, Cathal. I talked about that, I know, in the first harvest last time. And while you're on, Cathal, do you have any poems for heritage? We've got poetry for heritage in 3 Sundays time. So that'd be great if you've got something for that. And we've got Kate Cloud Sparks, who's joined us. Lovely to have you aboard as usual, Kate. So I'll say, continuing, for those who've just joined, it's a bit of a sorry, it's going to be a bit of an ad hoc session because I didn't get the graphics done as I should have done. And so anything missed, I'm going to include next week, the highlights. Then it is just me, but we do have B. Smith as well with a couple of poems. In fact, talking to B. Smith, let's get on with B, because she is the only guest. And she was on last week, fabulous poems that we had, and I invited people to submit their poetry related to First Harvest, and it was delightful. And then she came up with a Crom poem. I said, hang on, B, can we have that next week? Can you come on live next week? Well, turns out she couldn't come on live, but she left us with a video. So it's a Crom poem, and there's actually a Bilberry Sunday poem thrown in here. So let's have a couple of minutes with B, and we'll carry on with the Croms.
2 poems that mention Crom Dubh and Crom Cruach. The first one is Llama Song. For what did we grow? For what did we seed? For what did we grow? The child, the job, the project in need, the book, the garden, the rising bread dough? What do we gather? What do we harvest? The fruits of our labor, the corn for the baker, some lightning, some storm, a fascist dictator. So what do we reap? So how shall we winnow? Where is faith's leap? How to stand in rivers' flow? Once upon a time, the reapers moved as one, all in a line, scythes rising and falling were. 1, 2, 3, cut. The internal rhyme and rhythm of a single song known by heart by all in that field. Now what shall we sing to live long and strong? What plant is revealed, sown last spring when all were young, hopeful, green, and unhearing of the babble by the triple-tongued, selectiveness being more usual in the aging. Now, so too is the year. Now is the time of the cut, the time to winnow the chaff, before we can all sit down to banquet, and the play fights won't all end in laughs. Crom Dubh presides from below, belly full, grown fat on summer's sacrifices. But this was never his price. This was our seed, and now what we have grown. The next poem is called Bilberry Sunday, and I actually wrote it the week before last for John's sessions. So, Bilberry Sunday. Hurry to cut the hay, foot the turf, the blazing sun plays beat the clock, waltz time to tractor engine tune. The council officials sigh the long grass around graves in the old cemetery, dressing them up to be blessed once again. Sunday is meant to be for rest. In this most strenuous season, long days of sweat bear first harvest. Even so, we take the time to climb up holy heights or circle the holy well, repeating ancient patterns, saying prayers. Bilberries, tight fruits, slightly sour, are offered up on walks taken in high summer's brief leisure hours. Bog myrtle, too, sprouts from peat-rich high ground, exposed to sun and scorched dry by recent heat, splintering like bog oak exhumed, risen. Up from damp, ancient underworld, auld Crom Cruach's proper domain, along with Belcoo's freezing spring. The pilgrims visit, praying the pattern, an elegy, requiem for the dying summer, and all being gathered. But just now we are too busy. We must save the seed and preserved fruits of harvest we don't consume. We are too busy to mourn what's cut down. It's enough to know the year is waning, that seed saved is hope of new beginnings. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, B. And there we have a little bit of reference to Crom Cruach in poetry from B. And now we're going to get down to the serious stuff. A couple of things I didn't mention. I'm not outside, I'm inside. And even though the weather's quite good at the moment, I'm not going to go into the reasons why. But one thing I'm trying out, how is the sound with you? I did a little experiment to try and muffle the echo that happens when I'm inside. Is it echoey, or does the mic sound okay to you? I'd love to know if this experiment is working for you. So just a quick note, just let me know, see if anybody has said something about that. Thank you, B. Love the poetry, said Sherry. So let's get on with it. I haven't really got started. We're halfway through. Who was Crom Cruach? And well, Crom Cruach itself. Now here's a young lad who's impersonating Crom Cruach, because this is one of the traditions. Is when it's time for the cutting of the barley, cutting of the cereals, there's usually someone who makes a sheaf and wears the sheaf, and that's an impersonation of Crom Cruach. That's one of the things that were done. In some places, there was an image, a Crom Cruach image. It was held high. And Crom Cruach's like Buddha. I don't know if you know with that in Buddhism, that the Buddha is not allowed to be at the same level as you. The Buddha's always got to be high. You've always got to be lower than the Buddha, because no one is equal or higher than the Buddha. So it's always bad luck if the Buddha is against you. And of course, you go into people's gardens, they got the Buddha down on the floor. Buddhists kind of frown at that a bit. The Buddha should always be up. And it's the same as Crom Cruach. And I'm going to actually explain why. And just about that again, there's a Crom Cruach impersonation. But I'm separating Crom Cruach from Crom Dubh, mainly Crom Dubh next week. The reason for that, I've been told and read that Crom Cruach always seems to be there for the ripening of the cereals and for the threshing, hence like the lad there. And however, when the cereals are then gathered and they're ground down to make various flours and is then stored, Then the fields that are left fallow, they go into hibernation, and the leftover straw is also used for various celebrations between now and so on, and also midsummer, straw boys, that type of thing. So Crom Dubh then comes into play, and that's the image of this folklore. Now it's as if Crom Cruach is the end of summer and Crom Dubh is the start of autumn or the fall. And of course, there's a transition between both. And there's another definition that I'll share later when the story is told of St. Patrick, who banished Crom Cruach, and Crom Cruach then went underground to become Crom Dubh. So there's another story coming up. Also, Crom Cruach is told of as being a god, and Crom Dubh is actually more of a mythology rather than a god figure. Now, at this point, it may seem that Crom Cruach and Crom Dubh are incredibly patriarchal. And indeed, these Croms, they seem to have been flowed through a patriarchal kind of realm. Their stories usually do not include girls and young women, especially young women picking flowers and bilberries. That doesn't really come into their stories at all. So, in a way, there's no Tailtiu goddess, no stepmother of Lugh, but there is Grania, and I'm going to be mentioning her quite shortly, really. Now, Crom Dubh's gender actually is not clear. Crom Cruach, definitely. The sun, the ripening. So if you think of Lugh, definitely association there. But because of Crom Dubh is more underground, most entities of the underground mythology are usually told of as being of the feminine realm. But detouring from that, there's similar imagery to Crom Dubh that's come up through Herne the Hunter, definitely Nunas, and or just a big bull. And there's a picture that hasn't come up, and I must apologize, Chandler. I haven't quite got your picture up. I'm going to actually show that next week, because Chandler's come up with a lovely Crom Dubh picture, and it's going to really associate with what I'm going to be covering next week. So thank you, Chandler. It's a beautiful painting. But there's not really a Tailtiu in these stories. As I say, there is a Grania. There's one thing I would like to show in. So I haven't got these pictures in order today, but we talk about the transition from Crom Cruach to Crom Dubh. And if I can get this up, there he is. If you've been to Ireland, I think a lot of you have seen this figure, haven't you? The Janus figure that's over in Fermanagh. And there's two faces. I think I'll talk a little bit about that later, but there you get, I think, is a transition of the two faces. Crom Dubh, and there we got Crom Cruach and Crom Dubh together in a single figure. I'll come back to that. Very important. Anyway, Grania indeed. Now, Crom Cruach as an image is a god of vitality, endless energy, and he was and maybe is both a solar deity and a fertility deity. And I've got some alternative spellings. I think I've got them up, and this might help you out. There's so many ways this is spelled for Crom Cruach, and this is one thing I got up. I'll leave this up for a couple of minutes because there's a lot of spellings. I'm not even going to repeat them, but there's all the different spellings from all the different ancient texts of this Crom, because it was from oral. You know, there's no exact spelling. It's all whatever the scribe. The scribe has to sort of match letters to the oral, and they took several hundred years to try and sort that out. From the 4th century, and they really didn't get any grasp until the 11th century, and even then, it was how that'll do. It was a kind of makeup. So he of many spellings is said to have been worshipped and revered since the time of Erimorn, who was the first Milesian king. And I don't have any pictures of Erimorn, but I find that very odd because the Milesians are told of as being a tree people. And they actually seem, when they arrived in Ireland, they seemed to struggle with learning the skills of agriculture. They weren't starved. But they did eventually get the hang of agriculture, did a pretty good job with it, and that was with the support of the underworld Tuatha De Danann, if you're familiar with those stories. A bit more about that later. Now, I think the Crom Cruach origins are far more, they go way back to probably to the Fir Bolgs. And I'm going to explain that too a bit later. But much more fitting, and this is something I'm going to be talking quite a lot about both this week and next week, is a Fomorian story. And I'm going to share that with you shortly, but it's quite a long story and it's fascinating. And some of the information is as new as the 1990s because of some discoveries that were made. So I'm going to be soon sharing stories about St. Patrick and the Christians that banished the observance of Crom Cruach. Yet, even though they banished it to holy wells and other places, other divine Christian faith places and sanctuary, you notice the Christians, especially the Catholics, they go through routines of pilgrimages and they have ritualistic encircling, don't they? They circle around stone stations of the cross. And there's chanting of the Hail Marys and the Our Fathers. And all of those practices, I believe, survive from the days of Crom Cruach worship. Because this is how it's written. That's how it was done. That's why there's the circle of stones around Crom Cruach. So it wasn't completely banished. Now I'm going to go into a bit of how that went undercover as well. Now I did mention, and I didn't present the Dishinkas in the Book of Leinster and Book of Invasions, but Crom is mentioned very well, as I say, in the tripartite of Patrick, and also in the 14th century book of MacGovern. And this was, all the stories are similar. You got the gold-covered stone idol or the statue. And in the MacGovern version, the 14th century, the stone idol is actually called Sermon Cestach. And that is said to have been seized somewhere in Leinster. So there's a different location. There was this idol, the Sermon Cestach, taken from Leinster, and it was actually put to a cathedral up in County Tyrone in Clough. And it was an ancient stone, and it was said to have been parked there really to attract the pagans, attract the peasants in. There was this conversion, trying to get them into the church, support the church, into the Christian church. So they thought, I will bring something of them that's precious into the church, and we'll get the pagans in. But it was actually taken out around the 12th, 14th century, where that statue is now. From Crow, I don't know. But the priests got scared of it. They actually said that when they passed it, they could hear the voice of the devil. So out it went. So the Sermon Cestach became known as an oracle stone. And this is the idea, the devil was speaking to it. They got visions of the devil just looking at it. And this is the same with the Crom Cruach stone that was at Magh Slécht. And also the Stone of Destiny. Those of you who've been to Island Bound to have gone to the Stone of Destiny, Stone of Scone or Tara, which I think is a bit suspect. I don't think that was the original stone, but that's not for me to go through today. But anyway, they are oracle stones. And on these nature folklores, I've talked about holy wells, going up to the holy wells for visions and staring into the water for visions. And so the oracle stone mythology is that same idea that you actually get visions from the stone rather than the water. And water oracle does come from Greece, and so does the stone. So that is something that's been passed over by the storytellers. Now, I think it's also worth mentioning that the traditional Scottish classic, and I wish I got pictures up, I have to talk about this next week. The classic, or the Irish folk harp, I should have a picture of Claire playing one, shouldn't I? And notice, with the harp, you've got the bend in it, they're bending down. And that style of harp, the angular harp, and it's got a wonderful history from Iran and from Persia, right through the north of the Mediterranean. And it became known, and funnily enough, it started to become known from the Balkans, I believe. Excuse me, it became known as the Crom Cruach. Cruach is a harp, the old Gaelic name for a harp, Cruach. So because it was known as a Crom Cruach because the harp was of the arts It was connected to arts that came from another place, which I'm going to talk about before the end of this session. And it's where visions were transmitted. So the oracle of the stone, oracle of Crom, and its visions, the bards and poets transmitted through the Cruach, so it became the Crom Cruach. Anyway, let's see what you're saying at the moment before I dash on to the next bit. I grew up on the North Shore, Terry Slack. Sound is good, lovely bees. Everyone's happy. Sound great, thank you very much. And Seven Serpents is certainly enjoying the sound there. Okay, I can move on with this as best as I can. As I say, sorry I'm not kind of coordinating the photos and pictures as much as I would like. I've got a few to show yet. Here's one. There's Patrick versus the Crom Cruach. That's a funny looking statue on the left, isn't it? It's got one eye. Goodness. As I say, I haven't got them in any particular order, so I'll try and snap up a picture every now and then again. But as I say, I talked about Groin and Grania. The female inclusion. It's about the only female inclusion we've got in some of the Crom stories. And sorry, no pictures, but she turns up in the legends of mythologies as a goddess, as a heroine, and even as a clan chieftain. Now, Grania is even the name of the daughter of Cormac MacArt, who he tried to arrange marriage with his Fianna, his sort of warriors, the Finn McCall. He tried to get his daughter, Grania, matched up with Finn McCall, but she eloped to what is now this area of Sligo with Dermot. And the Dermot and Grania saga is a famous one, and you probably know that very well. But there's also River Grania. I don't know if I can show you it on the maps here. And this part of the Shannon waterways, if I can give some indication. Yes, if you look at that sort of river, see where the circle is, it says a parking space, and there's a kind of river goes there. That's the Shannon waterway. It's actually the Woodford River today, and it was actually once called the River Grania, and that's its older name. And where I've got that black ring, can you see where there's a loop? It sort of goes in a loop and gets straight up north. It's on that area. There's a famous battle talked about where Grania fought with Drecken, actually on that riverbed there, and talked of as a Fomorian, but also is appropriate as a Tuatha De Danann person. And this story evolved into George and the Dragon, and I brought this up on Nature Folklore as well, how the transition happened. But I'm mentioning Grania now, as it's often suggested that she was also the wife of Crom Cruach, the goddess of the god Crom Cruach. And also, she was also an inspiration for his stamina and everyone's stamina during harvest time. So in many ways, she's very similar to how Tailtiu is talked about, the foster mother of Lugh. But I haven't heard the stories of Grania dying of exhaustion, and there's certainly no sports aligned to her. Some of you might be familiar with Onya. Some people say that Onya is really Grania, and Onya is the goddess in the west of the setting sun, and she's the one that makes the red skies and blesses the day ahead, and she's the keeper of Tir na Nol. So she's a Shigwiki Onya as well, Grania. Now, threshed cereals are also, of course, they're called grain, aren't they? Like Grania. So that's obvious where that came from, I think. So now it's time to set the scene for Magh Slécht, I think. Crom Cruach or Crom Cruach is featured on the stories of ancient times on this land, Magh Slécht, and what we got here. I did show you pictures of it. Again, I'll give you a quick revival for those that weren't here. This is the region Magh Slécht to the west and south of Ballyconnell. And it's also known as the Plain of Adoration, and it's located in what's now the parish of Templeport in County Cavan, and it just reaches over into Leitrim a little bit. Now, some storytellers tell of this plain as actually being in Fenagh, which is south in Leitrim, It's in the barony of Mohill. But that's a lot farther south of this Templeport area there. And some characters that I'm not going to be including today, some characters in the Magh Slécht stories actually do seem to come from that Fina area. And I think that's where the confusion is. Anyway, I'm going to one important map here is this one. I'm going to talk quite a bit about this. This is around the Killycluggan area, and I hope you can see that clear enough. Can you see Killycluggan there? It's sort of towards the centre of that circle. Take a note of that corner because I'm going to be talking about it quite a bit. Also, look south of that. You'll see a thing that says Stone Circle. Very important thing I'm going to refer to there. So I'll bring the map back up again, but Killycluggan, that stone circle to the south there, and go way down to the left of that black circle. Can you see a little white bit, a mound that's there near Carna? That's a very important thing that's going to come up. So those three sites, that stone circle, Killycluggan, and that site, it's going to be very, it's going to come up quite a bit in the stories that I'm about to tell you. But I've heard a reference that an ancient Fir Bolg family is said to have marked that initial area of Magh Slécht. Sadly, I've lost the reference of what their name is. But more important is the story, and I'm going to talk about this character a lot today, the rest of today, and next week, of Tigernmas. And he's told of by storytellers, and I will have pictures of him next week. He's told of as being the Lord of Death. And it's told that Tigernmas was the chieftain who actually set up the gold idol of Crom Cruach. And he was the one who encouraged the devoted worship of Crom. How did that came about? And that's what I'm going to be telling you a lot about, especially with some recent discoveries through the rest of today and next week. Now, I believe the label of Lord of Death is really a description of the cutting of the cereals and the harvest. And of course, last week, I was talking about John Barleycorn. There's a bit of revival of this poor old John Barleycorn who's being cut down. And there is a man of death who's cutting down John Barleycorn there. And that's sort of in the England tales, anyway. Now, Tigernmas is credited with introducing gold and silver mining. Also, he not only brought the cereals, said to bring a lot of cereals into Ireland, but he brought in the gold and silver. And he taught the extraction of gold and silver and other ores. Also, it's vaguely associated, but certainly copper and tin and the making of bronze. That all in many stories goes back to this character called Tigernmas, which you may not have heard of. It's amazing that there isn't much chat. And again, and I'm keeping your edge of the seat, discoveries in the 1990s makes him quite a vital figure. Now, some stories tell of Tigernmas actually being a renegade Roman legion commander. But that's unlikely, as Rome was founded around 750 BC. And the story of Tigernmas, it goes back to 1500 BC, maybe 2000 BC, maybe older. So his name sounds Roman, doesn't it? I can't get the spelling up. But Tigernmas, it sounds very Latin, very Roman. So maybe the Romans changed his name, I don't know. But I'm going to stick to his name of Tigernmas. And he was the lad who erected, or more likely ordered, the setting up of the idol of Crom within Magh Slécht. So to remind those that might have come late, here's an artist's impression of the Crom Cruach figure, and he said that Tigernmas was the one who set that up with the silver and gold. Now, I'm going to show you something else very soon, when it's appropriate, if something still exists from that time. And I was told of being, as I say, there's that gold statue, 12 bronze statues, and some stories tell the center as being an upright stone pillar that's coated in gold to symbolize the sun, and the silver's there to symbolize the moon. Now, some associations are made to these stories as not actually being a stone, but actually real people. Some people tell of that idol in the middle as not being a stone or a statue, but actually Lugh himself wearing a ceremonial gold mask that was made by Tigernmas. And around Lugh, instead of 12 stones that are covered in bronze, some of the stories say that Tigernmas made bronze coats and put on the stone for this time of year. But other stories tell that that was actual warriors, the Fianna of Lugh. They had their bronze swords, and that they were the bronze figures. And there is an astrological link, the 12 months of the year there because of the 12. So these come up. I say the storyteller stories can get really confusing. So I'm throwing at you all the various alternatives. But I hope you enjoy this storyteller speculation. It's not something we can get the firm facts of. It's really all about imagination so far. Now, some stories tell of Tigernmas, say he covered stone statues with silver for the ceremony. They didn't use bronze. They're told of bronze figures, but there's stories out there saying, oh no, the main figure was gold, but the 12 figures around was silver, and there's another variation. But as I say, were these warriors and servers of Lugh that were around? That is the speculation, and I'll leave you wondering on that. There's also a statue of Crom Cruach in a place called Crom Cruach, which is just as you come into Fermanagh. Fascinating stone. It's near Balkan. And it's got engravings on it. I think the engravings were probably added later, but no one's sure if that's St. Patrick or whether it's some kind of druidy character. It depends when it was engraved. And also Balkan itself in County Fermanagh, just as you go over the bridge from Cavan. There's a street there that's named after Crom Cruach. It's the Crom Cruach Way, and that's in his honor. Excuse me for this. This is because it's only me speaking. So each summer, Tigernmas and his followers, they congregated at this Crom Cruach statue, and it was on Lunasa cross-quarter time, and that was yesterday. This year, it was yesterday, the 7th. It's not always the 7th, because in the time of Crom Cruach, there was no Gregorian 1st of the August. There wasn't that type of calendar then. It was all done with the sidereal time. And how did that get to Magh Slécht? That's idea of the sidereal time. Who was there to calculate that? Who was there to tell the people when it was time for Lunasa? I'll be dealing with that either late towards the end of this or early next week. But this was the point when the harvest was revered. It is the time when the harvest is cut, and after the hungry July, we're into abundant August. And people, of course, there's a lot of gratitude and celebration. And if this was way back in Magh Slécht time, then this would have been the time of threshing, the fairs, the whole works, with that transition from that summer to the fall. And I was told that Tigernmas cult also congregated to Imbolc. They didn't only get together for this Lunasa time, but they got around the statue also at Imbolc, Beltner, and so on too. And I'm not sure about that because really Crom Cruach is a Lunasa dedication. So those other meetups I think might be for the convenience of storytellers. So I'm not sure. But however, there is an ironic story, and it's in the Book of Leinster. It's in other books, the St. Patrick book. And it actually says that Tigernmas, who created the Crom Cruach, he created the cult around this, and encouraged people to worship it, that actually at once a one, he actually died, along with a bunch of his followers who were around this stone. I think that might have been sort of Christian propaganda anyway. So it's strange thing. It's one story, not Lunasa. But it's storytelling that's passed from oral telling to medieval scribes. And it took about 2,000 years to get from the Magh Slécht days to these scribes. And then the scribes themselves, of course, they were under patronage of people who told them to tell stories in a certain way. But imagine the stories I'm telling now, imagine those in 2,000 years' time. How would they hold for 2,000 years? Now, early Christians may say that the Tigernmas and his followers dying, that was God banishing those evil people. And while today's rationalists will say, well, it was probably a lethal plague or even a virus that brought them down. Now, few people seem to ask, did that event actually happen? And especially at Samhain. Now, not all of Tigernmas clans were wiped out, because there are descendants from Tigernmas that are said to be within the genes of the current O'Connors of Roscommon, especially those that hold the title of O'Connor Don. Now, an additional fascination to this is, how did Tigernmas and his ancestors arrive in Magh Slécht in the first place? And that is where the exciting stuff is now going to come to you. There's Little Wing here. I've been harvesting today, beautiful and busy in the garden, sending love, and Little Wings come through the YouTube again. Thanks very much. Good afternoon. And there's Breezy Kelly, who's loving listening. It's today Garland Sunday. It was. Well, I'm going to talk about why have we got Garland Sunday. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to that one today. Garland Sunday now with the churches the last week of July. And I do have a Garland Sunday. If you go back on the archives, you'll have the Bilberry Sunday and Garland Sunday as a separate edition. Last week I had the first harvest. But I'm going to talk a bit of the ancient Garland Sunday, why it was called Garland Sunday. I'll try and get onto that very shortly. If not, it'll be towards the beginning of next Sunday, because there is a lot that I'm trying to get into this. And there's Kimberly, there's a chat about the North Shore there. Great stuff. So I'm going to get on, because there is, I'm going to get as far as I can. But it's recently... It was always taught from the book Invasions and other ancient texts that the tall Nemedians, I'm going into a bit of Book of the Invasions now, so I hope you don't mind this, as I apologize to those who come in late. I haven't got the graphics I usually have, because I had so many distractions this week, so I'm going to come back with a revision and haunt you with lots of graphics next week as I complete the story. But I'm going to go back with the Book of Invasions. They tell of the Nemedians. They arrived in what is now called Ireland, a very ancient tribe of that time. Not necessarily the first. I think it was the Fomorians was said to be the first. Anyway, we'll start with the Nemedians. And there's no one, it's very vague where they came from. They're talked of being a boat people. And it said they enslaved people. They were going on, taught people on the big boats, and they picked up people, enslaved them. And they got some short people as slaves from what is now called Belgium. This is how the story goes in the Book of Invasion. And also some short people in Africa in other stories, like the Pygmies in Cameroon, those type of people. Now, these slaves, they became known as the Fir Bolgs. And they were set to work the land and create the agriculture. Because people up to that point being very much hunter-gatherer types. Some of the people were doing their foraging in a farming kind of way. Instead of sowing seeds, if they saw something they liked, they actually became more settled, and then make sure they would look after what was in situ. But the agriculture that the Fir Bolgs were doing was very similar, it seemed, in these Book of Invasion stories, very similar to what was already been happening for thousands of years in places like Babylon, Persia, Middle East, North Africa, as well, what is now Egypt. The Nemedians then were wiped out by a virus or a plague. But whatever it was that wiped out the Nemedians, it didn't harm the Fir Bolgs. They existed through this. So the Fir Bolg ended up inherited the rulership of the whole of this island that's now Ireland. And they set up a central administration in a place called Meath, which became Meath eventually. And you may be familiar with Uisneach. And that the courts that were set up by the Fir Bolgs right in the middle of Ireland, because they said it's a neutral zone, and they divided the rest of the island into 4 regions, which we now know as Ulster, Leinster, Munster, and Connaught. So all these 4 regions, that started way back in Fir Bolg times. And then, after they got all this sorted out, in comes the highly intelligent, scientific, ultra-spiritual, warmongering, peace and love fairy race of the Tuatha Dé Danann. And they battled with the Fir Bolgs and they took over control of the island. But then after that big battle, it seems the Tuatha Dé Danann, all they took was Leinster and maybe parts of the other regions. And they let the Fir Bolgs carry on with the farming just as they were doing. And also the Tuatha Dé Danann, they seem to have moved the administration from Uisneach and to Tara, and they revved up the importance of the Bord Valley as well. And before they could really settle down themselves, the Tuatha Dé Danann did actually develop a close but very unsettled relationship with the mysterious and so-called sea people called the Fomorians. And they've been assumed to be very similar to the Vikings, but much earlier. And there was a lot of interrace marriages between the Fomorians and the Tuatha Dé Danann. Now, eventually, it seems the Fomorians themselves declared, okay, lads and lasses, the Tuatha Dé Danann lads and lasses, go on now, you all need to pay taxes. And their taxes through forfeiting a portion of crops, cattle, especially this time of year when it was all being harvested. This was a time of wealth, and the Fomorians said, okay, hand it over now, come on. And they said they needed it in these stories, Book of Invasions, to expand their empire through their sea invasions. But before long, the Tuatha Dé Danann, of course, they won all that, didn't they? By their cleverness, their trickery, and magicness, and instead the Fomorians disappeared. But before they could settle down, in come the Milesians, and they sent the whole tribe of the Tuatha Dé Danann underground, where they became a fairy race again. Now, what I've done there, you might have noticed, is I was just simply reeling off a very potted up, very simplified, extremely short version of what people interpret from the Book of Invasions. Now, I think, as though I was telling that, and I was mocking some of it, I think you'll realize there was quite a few big holes. You know, a lot of it was fantasy, and it leaves us with huge questions. And we might even think, oh, that was just a bunch of nonsense that John just said there. But much of my silly version there, it comes from how the 19th century Celtic Romance people, how they interpreted it and how they shared the versions of the stories. And those are the versions of the stories we seem to share today. But for me, I love that Celtic romance. I was brought up with a family that was very deep into that. But I love what the modern researchers are coming up with. And they try to muddle through the very confusing Liber Gabala Aaron, which is a Book of Invasions, is an ancient text. And one thing they consider is that the scribes creating these texts were, as I mentioned, under the direction of the patronage of their chieftains, or sometimes their monastic leaders, the priests. And I've mentioned this a lot on Nature Folklore before. But these patrons were seeking to create scribed archives. They were kind of bringing the food and shelter to these scribes, so they wanted them done their way. And they wanted these archives, these ancient archives where we get these stories, they wanted them really to boost the images of their legacy. They wanted the future to see these patrons as being heroes or from hero clans. They wanted their ancestry to be full of heroes and full of success and almighty and of the elite, and they were the superior race, that type of thing. But one thing I've not mentioned is one thing they wanted to be is, though they're in Ireland, they didn't want to be mongrels of all these different cultures coming into Ireland. They wanted to be definitely linked to a culture that's an advanced race, a classical race. They wanted somehow that these scribed reports link them somehow to the Greeks, to the Egyptians, to the Minoans, the Scythians, the Persians, and especially the mathematical geniuses and geometrical geniuses of the Babylonians. And this is what they were patroning their scribes to do. That's where I think is perhaps the biggest hole. So, yeah, as I say, they didn't want to be a mongrel race of all these different peasants who descended from all kinds of different situations. They wanted to be a classical elite. Now, one of the semi-surprise things I've been reading from recent researches is that actually the Fomorians weren't the sea people as they're told to be. They were actually very expert farmers, and especially expert farmers with grains and maybe some vegetables too. And I'm going to talk a bit on that, because when you come into this area now, you see sheep, you see cattle, and in this part of Ireland, you certainly don't see barley and spelt and oats growing, not very much anyway. What you do see is, so I'm looking at the signal, it's starting to fade a bit, and it's coming back. What you do see is this area, we still eat bread, we still have barley, we still have porridge, but a lot of it now, it comes up from places like Cork and Tipperary, Waterford, maybe Wexford, and if it doesn't, it'll come over from the UK, it'll come in from Europe, comes in from Russia, comes in from the prairies in the USA. So we've got all of this trade that's been established. But way back in these ancient times, they didn't have that luxury. If they were going to survive and make bread, they had to grow the grains locally. And so that's why you've got a lot of these traditions then, and they seem quite irrelevant now. Now, I've always considered the Fomorians as being stone structure builders. Ever since I was a child, when I heard of these sea people, they were saying about the Stone Age making these structures, and even the Tuatha De Danann making structures as well with stone. I thought, no, the Fomorians, they wanted to establish themselves. They wanted to make a huge establishment. Always had that feeling for that. So why it wasn't told that they were stone builders, I've always felt that was odd. I don't think they were a nomadic sea race. The stories are told that it was a nomadic sea race of men that came ashore, mated with women of the land tribes, and then they went back off to the sea, and then they would come back, see who was born, did they have sons, did they have daughters, and then the sons were taken off to sea, as it was said, and leave the daughters to work the land. That's how it's kind of interpreted. Now there's a modern surprise with this speculation. Not only were the Fomorians farming people and very advanced in grain farming, though Fomorians and the Fir Bolgs are very much the same people. And that's what I'm going to be talking a lot about for this last bit of today and opening up next week. And they weren't the tall race or a short race and so forth. The Fomorians and Fir Bolgs, it looks, were very similar. So why I've run around in circles detouring, talking about Crom Cruach and the celebration of harvest, why I've been talking about the progression of invasions and changing cultures rather than sticking to Crom, it's because modern scholars are looking at the mythology and the worship much closer now. They're looking very close to Crom Cruach and Crom Dubh, more than it's ever been done. And how did the Crom cults come to this island, which seems obvious that they came to this island with the Fomorians? So this is where I'm going to go back to this Janus figure. You know, we got this Janus figure here. And I think this comes from the Fomorians. This comes there, the two-faced figure. Sunbar Island in a cemetery there. I think some of you have visited it. And it's claimed to be possible, as I say, that it's Crom Cruach one side and Crom Dubh the other side. Two faces of the same god, two-faced Janus figure. And Janus is the symbol of transition anyway, in any culture around the world. If you've got Janus figure, it's a transition. It's a culture of transitions. In China, it's said that it's of the past and the present. You've got don't look at any of the faces, otherwise you lose touch with the future. I mean, yeah, I'll say that again. In China, one face is the past, one face is the future. Don't look at either face, otherwise you'll lose touch with the present. But in other cultures, Baltic cultures, I'm going to go talk about the Balkans a lot very shortly. Similar to the Crom Cruach and Crom Dubh, transition summer into the fall, into the autumn. Now, there's a legend that the Fomorians demanded the firstborn to be sacrificed. That's something you'll see, and I'm trying to get rid of that. That's something you'll hear about Fomorians, and even about Crom Cruach as well, demanding the firstborns. Well, that doesn't make sense. They're trying to collect taxes, aren't they? And it said that part of their taxes was actually, if you haven't enough cereals and you haven't got enough cows, then donate your firstborn so they can actually slaughter them and donate to the agricultural god. But to me, that doesn't make sense at all. And I'm sure at the time of Fomorians, it was hard enough actually getting the populations to increase. So sacrificing the firstborn when you're trying to increase your population, every race was trying to, every tribe, every clan was trying to increase its size, because a bigger size, more farming, more hands at work. So why would you get rid of your firstborn? It's going to cut down your population. So that doesn't make sense. So it's worth looking at this idea of the sacrificing of firstborn. What was the tradition at the time? What is this image saying? And I'm thinking of the mating traditions of Beltane and the garland traditions related to the discovery of pregnancy, a garland Sunday at the end of July, and the traditions of the birth at Fir Bolg. This is all before this Lunasa time. And there's been discovery of mass graves of babies discovered at some of the megalithic stone sites. Up at Archaeological there, for instance, is one of those places. But they're generally, these mass baby burials are dated to the same time as these caves were being built. And that's well before Fomorian time, I believe. And it's thought that these were burials of stillbirths, going back to the mother womb, because there's no sign of any injury, there's no sign of any violence, and unless they were poisoned, I don't think so. Anyway, I'm going to start talking more about Tigernmas now, because Tigernmas is said to have included the famous ancient idol of Magh Slécht, as I've already said, and he was encouraging the worshipping of Crom Cruach as a Fomorian god. Now, this is what I want to work around. So if this was so, was Tigernmas a Fomorian chieftain? Was he a Fomorian chieftain trying to encourage people to worship Crom Cruach as a Fomorian symbol? The other question is being looked into, was Tigernmas actually the Fomorian king? Now, some researching scholars these days are explaining the idea that Fomorians were the people who possessed the grains of the skills of green agriculture, and that's what came to Ireland. And Tigernmas was the leader of all this, and he was the head leader who trained people and introduced the agricultural skills to Ireland. So if this is so, this would take the Fomorians to well before the Copper and Bronze Age and back to the agriculture culture of the Stone Age. That's revealed by the Cady Fields of Mayo. I wish I had some pictures of that. But you might be familiar with the Cady Fields of Mayo. You can go and visit a sample. But those underground fields that were discovered, they stretched well east into what is Sligo now. It was massive, actual walled fields. So there's many, many questions to follow the wonder of. Now, there's an author that fascinates me, James Bonwick. I haven't got his book picture up now, but he wrote The Irish Druids and the Old Irish Religions. James Bonwick. I'm going to talk about his presentation. And within his book, he does suggest that Tigernmas is actually a Fomorian king. And he goes on about how he was perished the one as well. He comes up with that story. But Bodwick also compares Tigernmas with Bala, who is told through the Book of Invasions, through the Dinsinkers, as being the king of the Fomorians, living on Tory Island, and especially his very huge feature as concluding the second battle of Moitura, where he appears to see how things are going. The Tuatha De Danann win the day. There's Lugh. Then there's that famous battle of Lugh knocking his eye out, over what is. There's a lake that disappears, the Lake of the Eye. Oh, I've suddenly forgotten the name of it now. It's near Loch Bow, which keeps its water, but this one keeps losing its water. It'll come to me. It's just a bit of brain fog at the moment. Anyway, it's away from what I'm trying to talk about. But as I mentioned last Sunday, what is told and known is that Tuatha De Danann's harvest god's son and second battle coordinator Lugh is told of as being the son of Ethna, who's daughter of Bala, and that Lugh was raised by his foster mother Tailtiu. And that leads on to the very dramatic Lunasa harvest and sports stories that many of us are familiar with. But Bodwick points out that within the lesser known text, there's another text called the Balian Scale. I haven't got the spelling, the Balian Scale. And that was scribed in the 11th century by the ancestors of the O'Connors. And I mentioned that Tigernmas and the O'Connors, very much the same. I don't know where this Balian Scale was scribed at all, but in his texts, it actually mentions that Lugh as being the son of not Ethna, but Ethliu, who was the wife of guess who? Ethliu, and not Grania, was the wife of Tigernmas. So this is possibly linking Tigernmas to actually also being Bala, the king of the Fomorians. Now, one difference is that Bala, in the Balian Scale text, Lugh's a direct son of Tigernmas. But under Bala, with that story, he's the grandson. So we got a little confusion there. But according to archaeological records, grain farming arrived in Ireland about 4000 BC. And copper metallurgy arrived about 3000 BC, bronze about 2500 BC at the earliest. And we don't get onto gold and silver until about 2000 BC onwards. So that makes it very awkward linking Tigernmas, bringing in an introduction to agriculture and also bringing in an introduction to metals, especially gold and silver. So we're left with that hanging. Anyway, let's see what he's saying at the moment. Tigernmas, that's it. Tigernmas it is. That's it. Thanks, Edward. I should have had the spelling up. I'll bring all the spellings up next week. Thank you for that. Actually, Breezy, you're not far off because I have read of him being a Tigernmas as well. It's like, as I gave the Crom Cruach, all the different pronunciations there. And Claire's with us here. I hope you're able to follow that in. Fascinating as usual. As I say, I'm sort of on one arm with this one. Thanks, Edward, for that, and thanks for joining the board with that. Now I'm going to go overseas to the Balkans, and I've been hinting with this before. I don't think I've got any pictures for you for this today, anything. Anyway, I'm going into Serbia, 7000 BC Serbia. And this is roughly the start of when farming was forming in that area, the Vinca culture, V-I-N-C-A, the Vinca culture, and they were living at the south end of the Danube River. Now, a few bells will probably come to you when I say that. Now, in this Vinca culture area in Serbia, there was what is known as the Blagotin culture. Sorry, I haven't got the spelling again. I'll bring this up next week. But remember the Blagotin culture. And at 7000 BC, these Vinca and Blagotin people, they were said to be, at the time, 7000 BC, the most advanced humans in the development of agriculture, also in the scribing, arts, metalworking. And I mentioned the Crom Cruach, the angular harp. That was in their culture as well. Now, some of their scribing symbols, and I do have a picture of this array if I can find it. This is the Vinca. This is their scribing. Have a look at this. There you go. Look at that. That's their advanced scribing, 7000 BC. And from the Orm stuff I've been carrying, you might see a few Orm symbols in there that were actually thrown in by, I think, 7th, 8th century scribes. It's as if they grabbed a few of those symbols and threw them into the 20 symbols. They took 5 symbols out of that, added to that, and that's when they started with the scribing. And the scribing of Orm wasn't from the bottom to the top. Those 7th, 8th century scribes started scribing Orm as prompts from left to right, like with their form of Latin. Anyway, that's all I got for that. I'll have a few more pictures related to that culture as well. But this Black Otting culture is associated with an archaeological site, which is probably the most ancient temple site in Europe. I told you the best stuff will come last. Now, this Black Otting site, I'll have pictures next week. It's a recent discovery by a Dr. Svetozar Slankovic. I think I got that right. Svetozar, Edward, you're probably up on this, Stankovic. And this discovery of the Black Otting site was just before the Yugoslav Civil War in 1991. And the excavations at that site, they continued from 1991 only until 1995. It was a joint venture between the University of Belgrade in Serbia and also the University of Manitoba in Canada. Now, Dr. Svetozar Stankovic, he led the excavation, obviously. It was his discovery, but sadly, he died in 1996. And the whole of that, archaeological site, it was closed off. And it's never been opened up since. And they only explored 2.5%, they say, of that Black Otting site. But the sad thing is, and the worrying thing at the moment is that Black Otting site, that most ancient, possibly the most ancient temple, certainly of Europe, maybe the second or third most ancient of the world, it's not protected. It's not protected by the Serbian government. It's certainly not protected by UNESCO. But there were goddess figures taken from it, other artifacts, just even though it was 2.5%. Loads of stuff was dug up, and it's now all locked up in Belgrade University. Now, if excavations and research continued, there would be a huge amount of effect on what's now Egyptian and Persian history. It would change all that history tremendously if they carried on discovering what they did. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to halt that saga. I'm leaving you on the edge of the seat, and I'm going to continue with that saga of that Black Otting next week. I'm going to do this on next Sunday. There's some amazing things to come. It changed a lot. The culture itself, from the Black Otting culture, from the Vinca culture, it moved up from the Balkans up to the Baltic. And as it did, obviously, the culture kept changing a little bit. And once up onto the Baltic in what's Pomerania, a lot of Danube mythology came from that, because not all the culture went up to north. It didn't all go up into Ukraine or Pomerania, which is north of Poland. Some of it actually moved kind of, if I do the hand that way, it kind of moved northeast, Germany, Belgium. And I think that's where you might got the idea of the links between the Fir Bolgs and the Belgians. And so that's following the Danube into Germany. But there was other river networks. It was quite an incredible river network, waterway network between the Balkans and the Baltic. Very important with Viking trade later on. But I'm going to talk about next Sunday about how that culture moved over, both the ones that followed the Danube and those that went up into Pomerania, how those cultures moved over to Scotland and then over to Ireland. And an interesting one is how the Dagda mythology fitted into all this. I'm going to be talking about that next week as well. And I haven't talked about the Dagda in relation to Lunasa, because you may know Dagda is carrying the harp, and I mentioned about the harp connection there with the culture in Serbia. He was carrying the harp, he had the club. Was the club the stone of Crom Cruach, or was it symbolism of Crom Cruach? And he had this bowl of plenty, and he would fill up this bowl at every Lunasa, at every harvest time. He would be able to fill up his bowl of plenty, and it would feed people through the winter. So you've got this Dagda character, and I'm going to talk about some roots to him that's recently been discovered as well. And so he's carrying the Crom stone with him, isn't he? So we'll go with the Dagda, some interesting stuff there that I'm going to be talking about. And I'm going to show you some pictures. I do have the Killicolligan stone. I should have brought that up here. And this is how it was when it was in position. Look at that. It was kind of wrecked there, isn't it? And it was actually found in this stone circle here. Look at those lovely trees. This is a Killicolligan. Remember I said on the map, look at the map. Look again, there's Killicolligan there. See that little red stone circle there? That's what I'm going to be showing you here. There you go, there's the outskirts there. I think I might have one or two more to show you from there. Or don't I? Didn't I put them up? I must have put them up. Oh, there, this is inside. There you go. And this is where the this beast was found, was inside. Well, it was really... See that stone to the left there? It was found by that stone there, where it was found there. Now, if you go to, if I show that map again, Killicolligan, look at that corner there where it says Killicolligan. If you go past there, you'll see this, which is a replica. The actual original is actually in the County Cavan Museum. Anyway, from there, and I'll talk about that, and I'll talk about that artwork, because that artwork actually... Believe it or not, it comes from Serbia. And I'm going to talk about that, the Liton artwork, and why it's on that stone. Oh, fascinating. You really left the best of next week, haven't I? So I hope you come back next week. I haven't finished yet, though. I'm going to also go on to Grange. I'm going to be talking about the Grange circle here. Do I have a Grange picture? I've got to have a Grange picture somewhere. Where are you, Grange? I did thought, well, at least I'm going to have a Grange picture. I might have shown it to you earlier. There's one I'm going to show you that I was talking about, that there's some tricks that Patrick did with his crozier. I'm going to talk about them next week, and especially as it's called, the Bacalaios, the staff of Christ, the staff of Jesus. There we go. That's this. I'm trying to find a picture of. I don't think I've got one. Oh dear! I thought I had a picture for you. No. Oh, there we go. There's Grange, and we're going to be talking about Grange. I've already shown you that before as well. And why all this crop stuff was vital for farming. I'm going to be talking about that. So I'm going to conclude with the myths and legends of Crom Dubh as well next week, and that will lead us into the autumn and fall. So I'm sorry I couldn't share it with you all today. I hope the introduction I gave to Crom Cruach, Crom Dubh saga gives you a nice kind of insights and background. And once we've done with that next Sunday, coming up after that, we do have Poets for Heritage. There we go. We've got that. That's coming up on the 15th of August. 15th of August is next week, doing the Crom Cruach and Crom Dubh. Oh, figures and thumbs. Poet for Heritage is Heritage Week. It's on Sunday, 22nd of August. And then 29th of August, we've got Scents in Herbs, and I don't have any herbs up for that. So I've really gone on far too long. Anything that you've said, now let's see. Breezy's got something. Farmers also brought animal husbandry, crop cultivation, also spinning, weaving, pottery making, land of milk and honey. Indeed they do, Breezy, and I use Nature Folklore to bring all those things up during the course of the year. As you can see, I've gone well over into an hour and a half now, and I'm still trying to stick to grains and the bringing of grains and being the celebration of grains. I'm actually going to bring up cattle next week as well. So there's a lot there. As I say, you brought up nearly the whole year's just by that couple of lines there. That's almost a whole year's nature folklore sessions there. But anyway, lovely reference, Land of Milk and Honey by Bryd Mahon. So great. And thank you very much, Breezy. Thank you all for being. And as I say, sorry I didn't have the graphics. It's been very impromptu. It's a story I'm very passionate about. Thank you, B. Smith, for starting this off, or starting off the Crom section anyway. And if you're watching this after the broadcast, and I still leave your comments. I still chat away with people that are on. Thank you very much. Enjoyed every moment. And I'm still getting used to this new interface from StreamYard as well. It's actually a lot better, but where do I click? Anyway, if you're not a subscriber, consider being one of our members. There's the Patreon link again, which is all very helpful. It keeps me on the air. And so enjoy a safe week. And I love being with you. I love chatting away and rambling away to you and answering your comments. So thank you very much as well for all that. And I'm trying to fumble here. So it's until next Sunday. I'm leaving you on the edge with this. And it's going to be really fascinating. I'm going to link everything up I've said today next week. And we're going to have some amazing conclusions from recent discoveries. So until next Sunday, play well. That's all I've got today. So bye-bye. And thank you so much for sticking with us. Bye. And I've lost my farewell sign as well. There we go. What a day. Thank you very much.